Good afternoon, everybody. It is around 12:40 in the afternoon on Monday, the 2nd of March, 2026. And as I'm sure everybody watching this and otherwise knows by now, over the weekend, the United States of America and Israel attacked the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, I'm going to have some videos to say some interesting, I hope interesting things about that in the near future, dealing with the propaganda ecosystem in this war, because that's what it is. And with the social and cultural currents that are active in all three combatant nations that will govern, in large part, the course of this war. But for right now, I want to start out with saying something maybe kind of small, but I think fairly important. And that is that no matter what political or legal justifications the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime come up with for their actions thus far and yet to come, this war is a moral monstrosity. It may not technically be a crime. I happen to think that it is on several different levels, but there may be an argument to be made that it is not, technically speaking, illegal. Marital rape was not, technically speaking, illegal until somewhere between the mid-1990s and the early 2000s, depending upon what part of the United States the alleged act took place in. Spousal abuse was not technically illegal in most of the world for most of human history. Lots of things are legal either on a technical basis or outright, which are moral abominations. Slavery, pedophilia, these things were legal at various times and various places. But that does not change the fact that on a moral level, they were and are and always will be monstrous and indefensible acts. Same for this attack on Iran. Now, this isn't to say that I have any kind of love lost for the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime is as nasty a bunch of totalitarian, theocratic nationalists as you ever went a long way out of your way to avoid. And if it had been the Iranian people who, I don't know, maybe dragged their leader and his wife out of a helicopter and executed them on whatever the Iranian equivalent of Christmas Day would be, Eid al-Fitr maybe, I would have had no problem with that at all. But just as it came down to the people and the army of Romania to remove their dictator in that fashion, it was down to the people of Iran to remove their dictator in that fashion. Now, there are going to be people who say that that's a ridiculous argument because getting rid of the regime frees the people. It really doesn't. Most of the time, getting rid of a dictatorial regime simply creates a power vacuum in which other, sometimes even worse, actors and dictators can rise to power. We saw this in Iraq. A whole bunch of people of my generation, I was born in 1982, I was 20 years old on 9/11, spent this past weekend sort of imitating a pot of petunias and saying to ourselves, oh no, not again. Because we've seen this game before. And we've seen it played by people who are a hell of a lot better at it in every aspect than the crowd of drunks, drug addicts, sex pests, and third string mediocrities that surround Donald Trump. Say whatever you like. The Bush team were not stupid. We thought they were at the time, many of us, but they were not. Evil, yes. Stupid, no. At least certainly not on anything like this level. What normally happens when you remove a dictatorship is that a power vacuum instantly develops, and into that power vacuum step the worst, the most ruthless, the most brutal, the most violent, the most unscrupulous actors within that space. It happened in Iraq. It happened in Syria. It happened, about 3 times a week in Lebanon for 25 years running. Um, it happened in Russia. And it's probably going to happen in Iran as well. Because one of the other great truths about the American difficulty with fighting wars of this kind is that air power is great. Air power is amazing. Air power is a must have if you want to win your war. And it's been that way since the mid 1930s. But air power does not conquer. Air power destroys. Air power attrits. But just as Genghis Khan had to learn that you cannot rule an empire from horseback, the United States has had to learn over and over and over again that you do not conquer a country from the air. If you want to effect a change and make that change stick, you have to put boots on the ground, and you have to put them there for a generational time span. 10 years, 12 years minimum. If you really want to make it work, you need people on the ground for 40 or 50 years, like we had in Japan and Germany. You need to force that country, that culture, into your way of doing things. And that means you have to start with little kids and work your way up from there, educating them, indoctrinating them, brainwashing them perhaps into your worldview. If you don't do that, all you've done is blow up one bunch of murderous assholes and make job vacancies for a whole bunch more. Oh, and kill a bunch of civilians. The information security in the US, Israel, and Iran is extremely tight. It's being run by some actual professionals in all three places. Somewhat shocking for those of you who remember Signalgate from last year, but it's true. And so reliable information is very difficult to come by. It's part of the reason I'm not commenting on very much right now. But we do know that Israel rather, did manage to hit a girls' school and kill somewhere north of 140 people, mostly students. Now, this may have been a miss. It may have been a misidentified target. There's lots of things that could have led to that because this school is next door to, and until fairly recently was part of, a major Iranian military base. So there's all sorts of ways that this could have happened, from bad luck to a technical fault to carelessness to out of date maps to outright sadism. You never know. But the fact is that however it happened, we blew up a school full of kids. And I doubt that those are the only civilian casualties that have resulted from what is apparently a pretty significant number of air and missile strikes. This doesn't end well for anybody. I don't know exactly how it's going to end. But I know that every single thing we've heard from the Trump people has been some kind of reworked, retooled, detuned, wish.com version of the bullshit that George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Susan Rice, and all the rest put forward in 2002, 2003. I mean, all that's missing is Colin Powell at the UN with a bunch of, posters about how the Iranians are building nukes that can hit the moon or whatever. And the thing is, there's one other thing that we need to discuss and remember when we're talking about this. This is a channel about propaganda, among other things. One of the best things that any propagandizing power can have is an example of the other side making a mistake or behaving in a way which justifies, or can be made to sound as if it justifies, the propagandist's position. And one of the sort of dark secrets that isn't really very secret about the East-West divide is that a significant part of the reason that Vladimir Putin thought that he could get away with invading Ukraine is because he's been watching the United States and Israel, and to a lesser extent some of the other NATO nations, France, do exactly that for the last 30 years. Now, there are differences between the Russian invasion and even the most misguided and brutal American conduct in the Middle East. For one thing, the United States didn't go into Iraq or Afghanistan with the intention of destroying the cultural identities and the territorial integrity of those countries. There was no genocidal intent there. An awful lot of death resulted, but remember, genocide is not just about death, it's about the intent which drives the killings. But Putin is one of these true blue Soviet propaganda wonks who really does seem to believe that everybody works on the same basis that he does. This is a common weakness of powerful governments in general, and autocracies in particular. But all powerful governments have this tendency to think that everybody else behaves in the same way they do. This is one of the major weaknesses of Henry Kissinger's realist school of geopolitics. Not everybody is rational, and even rational actors don't always act on the same stimuli or for the same purposes. Kissinger never really did seem to fully understand that. Putin has never really fully understood that the US is not just a bigger, richer Russia, that it actually thinks differently as a culture and as a system. So when he invades Ukraine and the Russian army does what it does, he doesn't see any contradiction there because he truly believes that the United States behaved and is continuing to behave in the same way in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, this isn't to say that the US troops did not carry out atrocities. They did. War is atrocity. And anybody who thinks that the Americans were perfectly behaved little Boy Scouts in those countries and never engaged in looting or mass sexual violence or any of the things that soldiers do when they go into countries, anybody who thinks that we didn't do that is an idiot. But the Russian army has always operated on a different scale for that sort of misbehavior. And so when Putin sees the US going into various places around the world for his entire life, and American troopers, sometimes or often behaving very badly on an individual or small unit basis, he thinks that that's just the Americans acting just like the Russian army, but we're only seeing the propaganda number, to borrow a phrase from a TV series. But it doesn't really matter, because the fact is, the United States hasn't really got, as a culture, as a country, much in the way of a moral high ground to preach to the Russian Federation. This is not going to end well for any of America's or our allies' needs and priorities in the geopolitical sphere. The United States is going to lose a lot of soft power, and the potential economic damage is really quite ugly. So what does this have to do with my first statement, that this is a moral abomination? Well, there is a school of thought that says that morality is at least in part determined by how much good is achieved and for how many people. The idea is that the more good you do and the more people you do it for, the more moral your act was. And even at that level, even if we say that the morality of an act can be changed by the number of people who benefit from it, this war, it is a war, is a moral disaster. It is an abdication of everything that Americans are raised to believe that we are. Now, I'm not an American exceptionalist. I've studied way too much history for that. But there is something to be said for a country trying to live up to its ideals, trying to be the country that it tells its children it is. No American adult who came of age or was already of age during the global war on some terrorism can really think that. But every betrayal of those ideals still hurts, still stings. Because if somebody's not willing to be the first one to try and be better, if nobody's willing to be the first person to stick their hand up as a culture, then we're stuck and we're not going anywhere. And we're going to fiddle fart around on this little ball of rock until some way or another we exterminate ourselves. The great filter, as it's been called. I don't want us to be great filtered out of existence. I want my descendants to go to the stars. I want my descendants to see all those incredible things that we know are out there with their own eyes. I know I never will, but I like to think that my great, 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 great grandkids might. And if nobody is willing to stick their hand up as a culture and say that this kind of thing is a moral abomination and we're simply not going to tolerate it anymore, they'll never get that chance. This attack on Iran killed a bunch of people the world is better off without. And I'm not going to apologize for saying that. The Iranian regime, the ones that are dead, good. The air is a little bit sweeter today for that. But the air is a little bit thicker, stinkier, more toxic because of everything else that went along with it and everything else that is going to come after. I don't know what that's going to be. I've made enough predictions that turned out to be completely wrong that I'm kind of out of the prognostication game. It's entirely possible that this whole thing, works. First time for everything. Just because something is new doesn't mean that it won't work. Just because something's being tried for the umpteenth time doesn't mean it won't work this time. The Wright brothers were not the first people to try and build an airplane. They were just the first ones that made it function properly. Any number of people got very, very close. But somebody had to be the first. Who knows? Maybe this will be it. It doesn't matter. It's still an abomination. It's still wrong. And the only way that it could be justified is if everything does work out perfectly. And then someone might be able to say, yes, we did an evil thing, but it had good results. So the evil was worth it. But we must never look away from the fact that the act itself was evil. I hope I'm wrong on all of this. But as a man who watched the towers come down on live TV and watched Colin Powell sell his soul in front of the UN with a look on his face that told us he knew exactly what he was doing, and as a man who watched friends go away to war, I don't think it's gonna. This is Eli Perry for Video Free America. Signing off.